So Richard, I understand that you were a part of transportation and taking trips back and forth to Erraid, and also that you lived on Erraid for a while. Is that correct?
For 2 years, a little over 2 years.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences on there?
Golly, Erraid. What's Erraid? To the north west of Scotland. I've got various groups of islands, and one of those groups is the Inner Hebrides. The Inner Hebrides, the Outer Hebrides. Some famous ones amongst them will be the Isle of Skye, as in the song that everybody knows about Scotland, and great romance around it, and very beautiful too. And to the south of the Isle of Skye is the Isle of Mull, M-U-L-L, fairly large island. Again, off the mainland of Scotland, so it was a ferry trip to get there, to get on and off the island. Now, as well as these fairly large islands, there are some smaller ones, and one of the smaller ones off the Isle of Mull is called the Isle of Iona. You may know the name of Iona. It's quite a well-known island. It's where apparently St. Columba first brought Christianity to Scotland. So there's a whole history around that, and there's the Iona Abbey, which is a very old, beautiful abbey. Yes, abbey. People go for trips there, and a great pilgrimage for many people. And now the foundation has a house on the Isle of Iona called Trebarn, which was donated to the foundation many years ago by an Italian lady. And Trebarn, there's a lot of bits and pieces of language here. Trebarn is a pair of words from Gaelic. Trebarn means white strand or white beach, and that's what's right in front of this particular cottage, the beach between it and the sea. So that's the Isle of Iona, and we've been custodians of that house for quite some years now, probably 30, 40 years. However, just probably a mile away from the Isle of Iona is another island called Erraid. Now, once again, this is some more Gaelic words meaning the end bit, and that's what it is. It's sort of, there's nothing to your west now till Canada. You go off the end of Scotland. Now, the Isle of Erraid, it's a shore station. Excuse me, all around the north of Scotland there have been lighthouses. There are lighthouses. Most of them are automatic, electric now, but in the old days they were manned by individuals, and so there would be one or two people on each of these lighthouses out on the rocks. And Erraid was an island which was set up as a shore station for some of these people to take a break. So they spend a couple of weeks out on the lighthouse, and then they come back to where their family lived on the Isle of Erraid. So the Stevenson family, as in Robert Louis Stevenson, the author, were a family of engineers who were responsible for a lot of these, for the building of the lighthouses and for the shore stations which served them. So that's how Erraid came to be, and it's a row of 7 cottages made of solid granite on the island. The whole of the island is all granite over there. If you ever come to do any work on those places, you've got to be fairly strong, because granite's a pretty tough stone. And there's a lot of granite been taken away from the Isle of Erraid around the world to places in South America and so on for various projects of building, particularly to do with the church. Anyway, that's how Erraid came about. It was a shore station for lighthouse keepers and their families. Now, the 2 lighthouses which this one served are the Duherta lighthouse and the Skedivore lighthouse, which are to the north and to the west of Erraid. You can just about see them on a clear day, about 15 miles away and 30 miles away. But of course that doesn't matter because they're all automatic nowadays. So the foundation has been running a bus across to the Isle of Iona anyway, to take people, guests and visitors, to and from the foundation itself, all the way across Scotland. That's quite a trek. And the foundations bus does it all in one day, all the way across to Iona and Erraid, right next door, and then back again on the same day, and that's quite a long trek. And as the traffic fills up more and more these days, it's even longer. However, to look after Erraid, well, who looks after it? It's actually the property of two Dutch brothers called the Van der Sluis brothers, or it was. They're very old now, and their grandchildren now look after it, but they're the people who originally looked after the place. Very generously, they've allowed the foundation to be custodians of it for them, looking after their sheep and their cows and the gardens. And they would just come out for a month a year for their holidays with family. The Dutch are coming. It's August, I suppose. The Dutch are coming. We're going to have the traditional every annual football match against the Dutch owners of the island, and they're very generous people. The islands are old-fashioned in many ways. At the time that I lived there, 1981 to 83, the toilets were not modern flush toilets. They were what they call a long drop, which is basically a hole in the ground, dug out and redug when necessary by the people living on the houses, and each house had its own toilet, its own long drop. Didn't smell too good, but then that's the way things were in those days. And I gather that nowadays they actually have proper chemical toilets. So we have a row of 7 cottages, and we have one at the end, which was the sort of community hall, where we had a kitchen and we cooked the meals. And then each of the houses had its own kitchen, its own bedrooms, and it would house a family, or some individuals, and also some guests, because people would come and stay there for maybe a week, because the bus only ran every Saturday, so of course they weren't going to get off again any other way. Okay, to get to Erraid, you have to drive right the way across Scotland, then out onto the island of Mull, across the island of Mull, and then find the last ferry, which takes you either to the Isle of Iona or the Isle of Erraid. Quite a lengthy trip, and one which, as one of the drivers of that bus, have often found the need for stops for people to clear their intestines, so to speak, because the roads going across there at that time were pretty difficult, pretty windy, pretty twisty, and at times pretty dangerous, because well, the weather's got a lot better these days, much as you may not think that. But there used to be a lot more snow and a lot more wind and rain about in the days that I drove that bus, and so that was also difficult for the passengers, sometimes with car sickness and so on. Anyway, so the Isle of Erraid. So I lived out there for 2 years. I went out there with my wife. At that time, she didn't stay there very long. She was a Canadian lady, and she went back to Canada after about 6 months. And we went out to the island. Now there were 3 couples living there with 7 children between them. Yeah. Two families had 2 kids each, and another one had 3. Now they were from all over the world. It was just like Findhorn Foundation. There were a couple from Australia, a couple from the United States, and a couple from England.
Can you tell us a little bit about the day? What was the daily routine? Was there a set pattern or anything?
Yeah, there would be people working in the kitchen who'd be cooking, obviously, and we all took a turn at that. And we were doing other things. We did certain duties for the owners of the island. They had about, must be 50, 60 sheep on the island, probably not that many.
So you were actually tending the sheep?
We were tending the sheep, yeah. Now, me having come from a computer background, working in an office, didn't know too much about sheep, but the sheep still needed to be sheared and dipped and rounded up and looked after. And
you guys would do that work?
Now, hang on.
Okay, all right.
Now we got some help with that, because there was just over the water. Let me see. There's a book called Kidnapped. It's a well-known book. romance, and it talks about the hero of the book being shipwrecked on that dratted rock Erraid, as if he couldn't get off the island. Now this isn't true. I don't want to ruin the book for you, but if you know where, you can walk across to the island anytime you want to, because the tide goes down. So it's actually a tidal island. So across on the larger island next door, the Isle of Mull, there was a shepherd who looked after sheep, his own sheep, and he'd advise us on what we needed to do. A very, very Scottish man. And when it came to sheep shearing time, he would help us shear the sheep with his sons, who were the guys who did the hard work shearing. And we'd have the job of rounding all the sheep up on the island, and that's, well, Erraid is a very bumpy lot of granite rock, and to get around that island, it doesn't look very big on a map, but when you actually have to round the sheep up, making a line of people from the centre of the island all the way up to the coast, and walking around it in an island in a row, and then wondering where are all the sheep, and then all of a sudden there they were. They'd all been sort of hiding and gathering.
So you didn't have sheep dogs then to round them up?
The shepherd did. Sometimes I wondered whether they really knew what they were doing, the sheepdogs, but they seemed to be helpful. So we have to round up all the sheep now, and then we have to drive them across the Narrows, which is the bit between Mull and Erraid. Drive them across, and then we'd shear them on Mull. Now, the youngsters, the young enthusiastic sons, grandsons of the farmer, of the shepherd, they used electric shears, and the sheep ended up quickly sheared and looking quite stunned, because it's alarming to all of a sudden find that your fur coat's gone. But there were one or two older guys, the shepherd himself and another man, who used shears, old-fashioned shears, and they're like hair grip, and they would work very gently and very carefully, and the sheep were much more calm, and they looked very cute because they had all these little tufts of fur all over them, and that's what the old guys did. And it was just fun to see the difference. And our job was to gather the sheep and to round them up and to herd them into where they needed to be sheared. And you could always, and also we were carrying little pots of dressing stuff to put on cuts and things, because some of the youngsters among the sheep shearers, they weren't too careful with the sheep, so you'd end up with blood all over the place, and you'd have to sort of patch these poor lambs up.
Well, let me ask a question. The purpose of Erraid was, it was a satellite community of the Fentorn Foundation.
Yeah.
And it brought guests over to stay for a week and to experience life in a small community. And did you use permaculture at that time, principles for?
Yes.
Oh.
The very basic version of. If you ever visit the island of Erraid, you'll find that all the gardens have little walls around them, because basically it's so windy over there, and nothing will stay in the ground once you planted it. So we did the best we could with working naturally. We had some very enthusiastic gardeners, and we did the best we could.
Yeah. Well, so what would the guests learn when they went there over the course of the week? What would they experience?
Community and the most basic sense of it. Because I don't know. The weather over there is very different from here. I can always remember Peter Caddy saying that this place, Findhorn, where they created this community, was a very, very windy place in the north of Scotland. Well, if he went to live on Erraid, he'd know what windy was. It's a lot more windy than here. Anyway, you'd wake up in the morning, and the first thing you do is you'd sort of look out of the window and try and see which way the trees were bending, which way is the wind blowing today, and it was very, very windy, and a lot of the time you would be spent sort of doubled over keeping out of the wind. So all the gardens had to have these little stubby walls on. But we were growing our own plants as much as we could. We also obviously we had 2 cows, a mum and a daughter, which of course we were responsible for milking too. and I became one of the milkmaids after a while, which is interesting. You know, you've been working in an office in a suit at a desk, and then here you were. It's milking time, and getting the cows to do what you wanted them to, driving them into a byre, and of course to keep cows in milk, you have to keep them pregnant. So you've got to sort of think of mother, granddaughter, whatever, and they're powerful creatures, and they can be stubborn, and they can be gentle, and they can be lovely, and we developed relationships with them, and I learned about those relationships. I also learned on how powerful a cow can be, having been stuck at some point in the byre where we milked the cows, having lured the largest of the cows in with potatoes, which are sweet for them. And that's how you get cows to do what you want them to do. And I sort of got stuck inside this byre with this very large cow wanting to get the potatoes that I was holding, that I was using to lure it. And this cow wanted to have its own way, and it got me sort of stuck in there with three walls around me, and me sort of stuck there thinking, how do I get out of this? I don't know this situation. And ultimately, it decided it was going to move me out of the way, and so it stuck its nose between my legs, lifted me off the ground, to which I quickly hoiked myself onto a little wall and climbed off and thought, right, you get your way, they're strong, all on the neck. And this was a cow, a milking cow. There's lots of different types of cows and lots of different types of sheep, and of course the cows we had were mostly milkers. They weren't, well, to get resilience in animals you tend to crossbreed them, and so our cows had a little bit of Aberdeen Angus in, which is a ferocious beef cow, and a lot of shorthorn, which is a much more gentle creature. A lot more easy to handle, so they were crossbreeds in all sorts of ways. Anyway, but we had relationships with these, and I was one of the milking people, and of course we milked the cows, and then we in the kitchen did what we could with using the milk, obviously, and making butter, making cheese. And of course we learned a lot about these things in a hurry. And of course the owners wanted to learn about these things too. So that was that we had the cows as well.
How fascinating. That's now, did you combine that with the guests? I mean, did they get a chance to experience what's it like to milk a cow, or
They'd watch.
They would just watch?
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless you've got an experienced person. But yeah, they'd help with the roundup, with the sheep roundup. So there's a bit of a story here. The sheep are basically what they call black-faced sheep, which means that they're regular white, fluffy, friendly sort of creatures. They generally do what they're told, and that's who they were, and they ran around the island until we rounded them up to get them sheared and so on, except for the Jacob's sheep. We had a little herd of Jacob's sheep. There were probably about 7 of them. Jacob's sheep are very different. They've got any number of different horns, 4 or 5, and they're just most unusual looking sheep, and they're black and white. And we had one called Jake, who was the boss. He was the one who sired all the others, and he was black, and he had 6 horns sticking in different directions. And you didn't argue with Jake. When he decided he was going to do something, he'd put his head down and he'd run, and you get out of the way, because it's only, well, a couple of feet tall, but they're ferocious, and Jake knew what he was doing, and you had to watch Jake. If Jake managed to mate with any of the black-faced sheep, the white sheep on the island, they would always produce black babies. Not good news. The owners of the island didn't like that, because you can't do much with black fur sheep, because you can't dye the wool. You want nice white sheep. So anyway, so we had these characters, and when Jake got an idea in his head, you got out of the way, because he'd knock you out of the way, and he'd easily knock the kids over too. So that was the Jacob sheep. They were fun. So my wife at that time was one of the milkers, and there was another lady who did milking too, and I took over the job of milking after a while. There were other things to do on the island. There was fishing. We had the fishing rights for the island, which is salmon fishing, which is lobsters. Now, much of the fishing of Scotland is done by people poaching, I suppose, but illegally. It's difficult to get the fishing rights. You know, they're expensive. You have to purchase them and so on. And some of the local people over in that direction were always surprised that we would happily sell people salmon. And they said, well, how can you get hold of salmon? I mean, nobody gets hold of salmon. I mean, you talk to Jimmy over there who pulls a few out of the sea on a Sunday afternoon on the quiet when nobody's looking. How come you can sell salmon? I said, because we've got the fishing rights. We actually have the rights to fish for salmon. Now this is fishing which is not, and this is hard work, which is not sitting there smiling with a fishing rod. It's in big nets, and in the springtime each year you would set out great big salmon nets, and they will be strung out between the island and some rocks which are further out and anchored to the ground, and that was a great big fishing net with a bag on the end of it, a bag net. And the idea was that as the salmon came round with the tide, they go into the net, and they would automatically go away from the rocks of the island into the net, into the bag. Yippee! Catch. And when the tide turned, they would come the other way around the island, and they would go into the net. And it was interesting to me that the best fisherman we had was name was Holger. He was an Australian. It just seemed that he could catch fish. I don't know if you can see this. There's a picture there. Down at the bottom.
Oh yes, yeah.
That was one of his catches.
Yeah, let me see it. I'll put it up here to the camera. Okay, yeah. Good.
So if you went out fishing with Holger, you were going to have a busy day, and it was hard work, really hard work to haul those nets out. And when he left the island with his family and went back to Aussie, we didn't have good catches at all. We could hardly catch anything. But a few years later, a New Zealander came along called Will. All of a sudden we were catching salmon again. I don't know what it is, but Antipodean people seem to do well. I don't know what it's like nowadays, but anyway, it was interesting, and that was just one thing. We'd also have lobster pots, creoles as they call them, that we'd put out every day.
Now, would you eat lobster and fish?
Yeah.
So you weren't a vegetarian community,
No,
like back here on the mainland.
No. Yeah, you could eat. We ate that. We had one or two really good chefs on the island who knew how to cook the stuff. Now, I was never a great lover of lobster. If we managed to sort of break the stuff open, then somebody made a really good dish out of it, that was good. But I wasn't interested in picking things out of shells and so on. And of course, if you got lobster creoles out, you've got a lot of crabs in there as well.
So let's coming off of this. What did you have a daily routine? Did you meditate in the morning, or what'd you do for?
Some of us would be up. There's a sanctuary up on top of the hill.
Okay.
Rather rickety sort of stone, wooden framed thing with some sort of plastic, I suppose, for glass. And some of us would be up there. I wasn't a regular meditator in those days, but yeah, we'd go up there. We'd use it for our ceremonies and so on. But it wasn't one of the big things on the island. I think it was important to some of us, but it wasn't a thing that had to be done. There were also some artists amongst us. Over here you'll see a piece of stained glass work from one of our artists. People living there.
Yep, it's picking it up here. That's it. Yeah.
So, and the thing is that there were little bits and pieces in between all the time. For example, if you went out in a boat anywhere, you just throw a few lines off the back and put in a few small fish, and that would be a nice sort of little snippet for dinner. But it wasn't the big salmon fishing, which was the main thing.
Yeah. So what did you do for entertainment? Did you have films or song, music, any kind of music, television?
We didn't have television, but I think, like most of the foundation, there's always people around. There's somebody with a guitar We had an American called Lauren who played the guitar, was great with the kids, made a few of his own songs up, and we used to have sing-alongs with him, storytelling and so on. But there wasn't television. I think again I'm out of date here. I'm probably 30 years out of date. They probably have phones which they can watch television programs, pick up all sorts of channels. But no, we didn't. We didn't have televisions.
Yeah. Okay.
We made our own entertainment, you know. And I suppose when you're out in the cold all day, you're shivering, and it's good to get indoors.
So you were truly on an island off the coast of Scotland in the middle of winter, summer, fall, winter, spring.
And that was true Scotland. And I suppose I didn't dwell on that too much, but I mean the other house on the island of Iona was a bit more sophisticated. I think it was a bit warmer and cozier. But the Isle of Erraid, yes, it was a rugged sort of existence, and you had to get used to that. That's the way it was.
How did you govern yourselves? Was there someone who was in charge of this community, or?
We had a vocalizer, the same as the foundation, and there were disagreements, and there were agreements too. There were the specialists. There were the people who were good in the garden, and the Lauren, the one who was good on the guitar and the song making and entertaining the kids. He was also an excellent cook. So we had our own chef there. Although we all took a turn. We didn't leave it to one person. We didn't have a vehicle there. I think one person had a car just over on Mull on the other side of the water. But we didn't do a lot of motoring. Didn't need to. You got stuff supplied. You called up Findhorn and said, could you send us some more so and so across on the bus?
Yeah.
We need send us some straw bales. You know, we're a bit short for the cows, because you got to feed all these cows as well. You've got to feed all the sheep. You've got to look after them, and so on. The other thing is that we spent a lot of our time on the gardens was seaweed. We would, I calculated, we would put something like 40 tons of seaweed on the gardens every year. 40 tons. And that's hard work.
Yeah.
Because you don't have a lot of fertiliser out there, so what are you going to do to get the gardens to work?
Yeah.
So you put a lot of seaweed down, you let it break down. I mean, when seaweed starts breaking down, it stinks. It's very good for the garden. So we grew as much of our own food as we could, obviously. There's going to be potatoes, there's going to be carrots, all the usual sort of stuff that you can grow. It wasn't very luxurious, but then, you know, a slab of cheese, cheddar cheese, will be put on the bus every week to come across. We weren't out of touch with the mainland here. You'll see, I don't know if you can see this down the bottom there. It shows the houses looking across the water. The bus arriving and looking across at the houses.
Yep. That's the garden there, and that's people getting off the bus.
Yep. The old bale of straw.
One of the children.
Yeah.
It looked like a pretty rugged
It was.
environment.
Yeah. So schooling for the kids. Well, I'm just looking out of the window here. One of my neighbours is a teacher at our local school. But yeah, so the kids, how do they get to school? Well, we take them across by boat, which was interesting because the kids, you know, it's freezing cold, the wind's blowing a gale. You've got to get these kids in a tiny little motorboat across onto Mull, where they'd be picked up by a car, taken halfway across Mull to where the local school was. That was up until a certain age of about 10, I think, and then they would, normally the kids would go off to a secondary school on the mainland, and that's when most of our families would leave because they didn't want their kids to go away to school.
Yeah.
That's what happens in Scotland. But no, our kids, we took them across in the morning, and you could see those kids, and they'd be wrapped up against the weather, and they'd be sitting in a boat motoring across. And dear John, who was our main boatman, he was there, and he'd managed to motor that across with 3 kids in it, absolutely shivering, and wind blowing a gale. And we had some very interesting things, incidents when the wind normally came in from a particular direction, which meant that the tide was pushing the boats up into the narrows, so it wasn't very dangerous. You wouldn't get into much trouble. But then on certain times of the year, the wind would change, and all of a sudden you find your boats were being swept out. There's no lifeboat on that side of Mull. It's got to come all the way around from the mainland. So we had some very interesting times then when the wind turned direction.
Did you ever ask yourself, what am I doing here?
Yes, I think I did, but I think I was still also enamoured by the magnificence of living a spiritual life, knowing that God's looking after us. We've got a sanctuary out there on the hill. I've got people here, I've got some people who are trained nurses, and people who know how to cook, and people who know how to look after kids. There's a community, there's a family. And amongst all these people, there are good fishermen, there are people who know how to garden. It was a small community, but a community full of people who could be of use. And then people would turn up to stay for a week, and all of a sudden you'd find you've got a person with a particular skill turns up at the right time. It's magical. It sort of seems magical. I know it sounds a bit airy-fairy, but it seemed magical that a certain person of a certain time would turn up at a certain time.
Yeah.
And I suppose I was in that position too, because I had certain skills too. So I got out there, and I was the person with the mechanical skills. So I looked after the tractor. We had a tractor, an old grey Ferguson, which anybody who knows tractors will know that that's interesting. And that's so. Okay, so what do we do for burning? What are we going to burn? Wood and peat. Peat is the sort of the ground, the packed down. It's the soil which is left when the ferns, when the bracken dies down, is what's left. And so we'd use a certain amount of peat, but we'd also use a certain amount of wood. Where are you going to get wood? There's no wood on the island, there's no trees.
I was going to ask, where do you get the wood?
You would. So we used to buy the wood from a local company on the Isle of Mull. They would deliver it on the mainland. Now,
and these were logs to go in, to go in a wood burner for heat.
10, 12 feet long. Now, obviously, you're not going to cut the wood up small and have to load it onto a boat, bit at a time. The thing to do is take it across in logs. So one of the other members, Janet, who lives near here now, she and I, for some reason, became the wood haulers. I guess because maybe we didn't have kids and we weren't cooking so much at the time. So certain times we'd have the wood delivered in a great big pile, and they would sit on the other side, and you're watching the weather and when's the tide low, because we've got to be in that tractor with a trailer ready to go. When the tide got low, we're off through the water. And up to the other side, load the trailer up as fast as we could with logs, get it back again, unload it, get it back across, and on a really good day we could get 5 loads across. But it was hard. It was hard work. Me and one lady called Janet. Well, occasionally we'd have a guest, a strong young lad who'd come and help with the wood hauling. And then, of course, once we got the wood across, we just dump it on the jetty at the other side, and that was one of my jobs, was to cut all the wood up with a chainsaw, and then deliver it bit by bit all the way up the hill to where the houses were at the top of the hill. And getting that tractor and trailer backed into those little alleyways between the houses and unloaded was kind of interesting. And and so one of my jobs was looking after the tractor. Now that tractor was amazing, 1955 grey Fergie, and it ran on paraffin, I think. And it once got drowned. It got stuck halfway across, and the tide came up and drowned it completely. Next day, when the tide went down, somehow or other we managed to pull it out, and it started. And that was one of my jobs, was to keep. Can't even remember what we called it now, but it was a grey fergie, and it was wonderful. It was just superb.
Did you ever get a break? Did people go back to the mainland, back to Findhorn for a week or so, respite? Or,
yeah, sometimes. Not as often as we'd have liked. But also, I mean, you might go and spend a day in Oban. You could get across to Mull. We had a vehicle there. We had a Volkswagen Combi van, and we could drive across Mull to. It was Fishnish was the ferry point, and then you take another boat across to the mainland, and you were in Oban, which was a city.
Yep.
And so you'd go wandering around the city, and you'd gather all the stuff together that you wanted, a bit of food here and a bit of vegetables there, and so on. And then you'd make a last-minute rush around the island with your Volkswagen van, pick up all the boxes of stuff that you bought, and try and get back in time for the ferry to get across. And that was probably once a month, maybe every 5 weeks. So we weren't totally cut off from civilization.
Yeah.
And you could say we did have civilization ourselves. You know, we had people there. We had people who could do healthcare and so on. For example, Janet, who's the one I used to haul wood with, she did some healing. She did some laying on of hands type healing, which she learned from a man called Bruce McManaway, an American healer. And so if we got a problem, then she could sort people out. She was quite an amazing healer. And there were times when a couple of fishermen, the local fishermen off the Isle of Mull, would turn up and say, "Is Janet there? Jimmy's put his back out again." And she was, "Oh yeah, right, okay, it's Jimmy," and she knew exactly which part to prod and prompt. And it worked. These people, these old-fashioned Scottish, careful what I say, fishermen or farmers, they knew that she knew what she was doing. She was a bit strange, and she didn't have the right accent. And they didn't really deal in money very much. And so often, if it was a fisherman that she'd helped, later that day you would find a little box of fish or a couple of lobsters would turn up down on the jetty.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So there was bartering going on. She knew what she was doing. She could put people's. When she taught me some of this stuff, and I've done some healing on her behalf here at Findhorn over the phone.
Yeah.
We had a lady, Joni, a very elderly person who put her back out again. Joni's put her back out. Oh, Richard knows about that. He can do that. It's number 7. It's vertebrae number 7. So I was on the phone, and there's this frail little old lady of about 80, and Janet said to me, "Oh, that's all right." She said, "Just sit her on a bench and get a certain height off the ground, and then put your thumbs as hard as you can between vertebrae 6 and 7. I said, "She's fragile. She's a skinny little old lady. Just hard as you can. Get her to breathe in and then slump." And it was back. And I mean, she knew this stuff, and she still does this stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And this is a woman of my age, I suppose. So, and we had her on the island.
So she was a contemporary of yours on the island when you were there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, did you ever get called by the Iona community to come and help out for anything? Or what were the communications? They mostly stayed to themselves over there?
They stayed to themselves. I mean, the people in the Iona community would be people connected with the Abbey.
Well, I meant Trebarn, though.
Right, I get that. And the people staying at Trebarn would be people staying there. There wouldn't be anybody there permanently. Usually there would just be the people who are staying there.
For that week?
For that week.
I
That's
see,
all that were
okay.
there.
Right.
And they would bring across the supplies they needed, but there weren't permanent people there, not at that time anyway.
Okay.
So no, there wasn't really that much of a communication. And I mean also, I think the Iona community as in the Abbey, were a lot more churchy than the foundation people, who were basically, you know, not antagonistic, but just not interested in the same things. We were looking after ourselves. We were looking after our food and so on. You can just see from these pictures that there's Eileen Caddy there cooking in the kitchen at Tray Barn. And we had a goat called Angel, who was a pain. Used to get everywhere.
Yeah, we showed this to the camera before. That's the goat, and that's Eileen at Tray Barn.
Don't mix the two up. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then how about, did you ever, on a Friday or Saturday night, go over to Iona for a ceilidh or anything?
No.
Or, no, you just stayed away altogether.
We were just sort of looking forward to getting everybody together and get their gear together to take them across on a Saturday morning to meet the bus, which was going to be coming in. I mean, the bus left Findhorn at 5:30 in the morning. It would drive all the way across, drive all the way back on the same day. So you had to get your timings right.
Yeah.
And quite some adventures. I mean, I think we covered that the other week. And some of the adventures that we've had on that. I don't know what it's like nowadays, because I imagine there's more traffic. So it's probably a slower drive, and I think it's probably a 2-day drive. But then, I mean, I suppose 30 years ago it was all a bit different. I mean, there wasn't so much traffic on the road, and you were there at 5:30 in the morning, and you were going to be driving all day, and you'd be back after 11 hours, and you'd have gone all the way across there and all the way back, and you'd have covered everything.
Would you like to go back and just have a visit for a day? Does that appeal to you at all?
I suppose romantically, yes, but physically, I'm 73 now. It wouldn't be quite so comfortable. I've got a daughter of 26, and we used to go across to Iona. She and I, for a week every year for about 6 or 7 years, and it was so nice on Iona. You know, we had more comfort there, and we could really enjoy ourselves and walk on that island. Iona's a much more sophisticated, beautiful island. I think it's just there's more grassland, more walking to do there. Whereas Erraid is rough. It's rough and ready. There aren't any mown grass, any mown lawns.
Yeah.
The whole lot is surrounded with these tiny little walls just to keep the wind off, because it's so rugged, and you're growing potatoes and carrots, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I mean, you know, when you're 30 years old and the world is your oyster, yeah, it's a great way of life. And would I do it now? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Richard, thank you very much for that. It was a great story to hear a little bit about what life was like in the early 80s, I guess, right? 80 to 83.
81 to 83.
Yeah. So thanks very much for this. I appreciate it. Bye.